When we announced our $35 million interior and exterior renovation to Walk Festival Hall, there were generally two responses in return. Number one, that's wonderful. Number two, you better not mess it up. The best way to make sure we don't do that is to surround ourselves with professionals, people who know how to preserve the soul of a building, who've been doing so for decades. And I'm lucky enough to be joined by one today. David Kahn is founding principal of Acoustic Distinctions here in New York, and he's been involved in this project with us since the very beginning. Hi, David.
Thanks for having me.
I'm curious what your first impressions were of Walk Festival Hall. What did you hear when you got there in 2022, when this whole process started?
So if I could describe what I heard, it's this hall has this wonderful reverberation and bloom, I would call it. And speaking with the musicians, the string players in particular just noted how easy it is to play in that hall. And you have this wonderful bloom. On the other hand, unlike a huge cathedral where you get maybe too much bloom and what you don't get is the clarity and intimacy, at Walk Festival Hall, I would describe the sound as also acoustically intimate. So you've got plenty of reverberation and enough clarity and intimacy, so you sort of have the best of both worlds. So that was really my important impression, and that was why I think people really love the sound there. The first orchestra rehearsal I heard, one of the things I noticed is the brass and the percussion were overwhelming the strings and the woodwinds. So that was a noted challenge. And then the other thing is that it sounded very different depending on where you were in the hall. So another issue was during the rehearsals, if there was anything going on backstage or in that rehearsal room, it bled into the hall. So that was another noted issue. On the positive side, the other thing that I noticed right away is how quiet the hall is. And so if you get to an important pause in music or between movements or something like that, they would wait just a little longer. And the audience, they might not have recognized the importance of the silence, but what an audience will do if they're in a room that's really silent like that hall is, that when you get to that critical moment, people will hold their breath. And the musicians understand that, and it draws people in to the program, and it adds to the excitement. And that's something that is a really positive attribute of that hall, and something that from the first time I heard it, I was determined to maintain that throughout this process, to make sure we don't let anything into that hall that makes any noise at all.
I think this is the thing that people want to hear most from you, that you are paying attention to the parts of the building that work and the parts that don't. And we'll circle back in a moment to what we're going to preserve and what we're going to improve. But before we do that, can we talk about the science a little bit? Because from the outside looking in, it's one of my favorite parts about what you do. Talk about how you measure a building, how you create your computer models. What are the systems, the software, the tools that you use to measure and model a space like ours?
Well, so in addition to all of that listening, we did do some acoustical measurements. One of the measurements we did is we measure something called an impulse response. The sound bounces off all the different surfaces in the hall, and those reflections eventually will get to the microphone. So the impulse response is basically measuring that direct sound at all those reflections.
David, I feel like we would be remiss if we didn't show people a balloon pop. They need to see how the sausage is made.
In order to create this impulse response and measure the room's acoustical fingerprint, we needed to record an impulsive sound source. So since we didn't have the starter's pistol, the next best thing was to use a balloon. So I have a balloon here, and Jeff, I think you remember, because when we did these measurements, I was holding the microphone and you were popping the balloon. Would you like to pop another one?
I would be honored.
Just for old time's sake?
I would be honored to show everyone the sum total of my contribution to the Walk Festival Hall renovation. It went a little something like this.
And so I was recording that balloon pop. So what happens is you pop the balloon, and the sound, the first sound that gets to the microphone is the direct sound from the balloon to the microphone, or to your ears if you're listening to sound in the hall. And then that's followed by a series of reflections. And the time of arrival of those reflections the loudness of those reflections is really what determines what a room sounds like. So I sometimes refer to an impulse response as an acoustical fingerprint. The next step was to understand in detail, why does the hall sound good? How's that reverberation being formed? Where is it coming from? The clarity, intimacy, what's making that happen, right? And so what we do is we build what we call an acoustical model. The acoustical computer model we built captured the size and shape of the hall, as well as the finishes. The computer model can be used to generate an impulse response, and we can compare them. So if they don't match, clearly we haven't done a good job. But so we call that process the calibration process. So we calibrated the model until the model matched the impulse response. I should mention another thing that you can do with these computer models. In addition to creating impulse responses, you can also create what's called an audible simulation. So now I want to go back and talk about another thing that I did when I was out there listening. And I have this, we call these binaural microphones. And these little things here are microphones. I don't know if I can get it on my ears, but during some of those rehearsals and even during some of the concerts, I was wearing these microphones. And so I was recording those rehearsals and concerts. And what I was able to do is, when I got back to New York, listening to those recordings on headphones, it was like sitting in the hall. So what you can do with a computer model is you can do the same thing as you can create an audible simulation of music in the hall. So they have recordings of basically just the direct sound of the music, and that we have this impulse response, and we use a mathematical process called convolution. And so we convolve the impulse response from the model with these anechoic recordings, and we create or recreate the sound in the hall. So we now have these audible simulations created by our computer model that we could, again, go back and compare to the recordings I had made in the hall. So that's another calibration process. Remember we were talking about that issue with the balance?
Yes.
And that the brass and percussion were just too loud. Well, there are a series of ceiling reflectors, and the ceiling reflectors that hang over the brass and percussion are very, very low down.
And by reflectors, you're referring to what we call clouds.
Yes, the ceiling clouds. So the ceiling clouds are important elements. They reflect sound. Those reflections are part of what provides that clarity and intimacy. Because we had this computer model and we had this technology, what we did is we actually created audible simulations of the hall the way it sounds now. And then we lifted up the ceiling clouds in the model, and we created new audible simulations. And so I believe you were there, and some of the musicians and the board members, we got together and we listened to the simulations. And so we were able to listen to the difference of the sound with the ceiling clouds down low where they are now, and then raised up where we had suggested they consider moving them up.
What other things are you doing to the space? What other changes are happening to the space to make it more flexible?
So we have worked with the architects and other members of the design team to design some new recital towers that will roll around more easily, that will look like they belong in the hall. But the other thing that we are doing, which has been done in so many newer halls really around the world, is we have sound absorbing materials that can be retracted and taken out of the hall. So when they're all retracted, it sounds the way it does now. But when amplified programs are planned, you can basically just push a button and these sound absorbing banners will come down, curtains can be extended, panels can be opened up to make the hall less reverberant, which is what's preferred when you're doing amplified music. So that's a change. Then the other thing that we're doing is we are improving the sound isolation between the hall and the backstage areas. We are changing the mechanical systems because we're adding support spaces, so we're adding mechanical systems, but we've been working very closely with the engineers to make sure that any new systems or any changes to the existing systems will not add any noise at all.
How do you test the building once it's done? How do we make sure that we got it right?
Towards the end of construction, the most exciting part is we'll invite the musicians into the hall. And so we will work with them and we'll all work together to figure out the best place to locate the ensembles, the best place to locate the recital towers.
What for you are the important aspects of the building that must be protected and maintained? And what are things that you are excited to be adding to the building's capability for the future?
Well, first and foremost is that bloom and reverberation and the clarity and intimacy and the right balance of having both. That has to be maintained. That's number one. And the process of listening and measuring and modeling and checking the model is the best way to be absolutely sure that that's preserved. So that's number one. Number two, I would say, is we want to make sure that when this project is over, that room is as quiet as it is now. We don't want any intrusive noise from backstage or outside or from the mechanical systems or lighting. So that's number two. In terms of opportunities, we have the new recital towers, which will be a welcome addition for your chamber music program. We have a new sound reinforcement system and these retractable materials that should make a huge improvement when you do amplified programs in there. And then looking towards the future, in addition to just having a sound reinforcement system that you can use, vocalists need to be reinforced, things like that, we're adding another component to the sound system that is sometimes called the spatial sound system, where for some of the more contemporary works, or if you're playing back films, and a lot of these soundtracks have these multi-channel playback systems, and to be able to add those new technologies into the hall, I think, and I have to applaud you, Jeff, for being so future focused. And when this project is done, it has to not only be as great as it is now, but it has to anticipate where the future is going, and nobody knows for sure. But
it has to outlive us both, David.
Yes, it does. And I'm sure it will.
David, based on this conversation today and the many you and I have had over the last 4 years since this started, I know that Walk Festival Hall and the Grand Teton Music Festival is in good hands with not only Acoustic Distinctions, but with you personally. So on behalf of everyone, the board, the audience, the musicians, the staff, thank you.